I stood in the middle of Emily's tiny apartment, a crumpled overdue rent notice clutched tightly in my hand. Her eyes were sharp, cold, and utterly unreadable, and then she said it, the words that cut deeper than anything before. "Mom, seriously, act your age." I froze, a wave of disbelief crashing over me. Act my age. After all the years I had worked, sacrificed, and supported her every step of the way. The bills I had covered when she barely had enough to eat, the nights I stayed awake worrying if she was okay, the countless times I put her needs above my own, did none of it matter now? My heart raced, my chest felt tight, and anger bubbled beneath the surface, mingling with the sting of betrayal. I looked at her face, so confident, so indifferent, and suddenly I saw all the tiny moments I had brushed off before, the eye rolls when I offered advice, the dismissive comments when I asked about her day, the casual way she assumed I would always be there to clean up her mistakes. Each memory slammed into me like a hammer, relentless and undeniable. My hands trembled around the paper, the edges digging into my palms as if the rent notice itself could hold my fury. And yet, as the seconds stretched, I realized something even more terrifying. Emily had no intention of seeing me. No intention of acknowledging what I had done, what I had been. She had built this world where I was invisible, where my love was taken for granted and thrown aside like yesterday's trash. The truth hit me with cold clarity. Everything I thought I knew about her, about us, was crumbling. Stay with me till the end, because what happens next will shock you. And if you love emotional revenge stories like this, make sure to like the video and subscribe for more. My name is Evelyn, and this is my story. I took a shaky breath, forcing myself to stand taller despite the weight of years and disappointments pressing down on me. A part of me wanted to turn and run, to leave before the words I longed to speak spilled out in anger, but another part knew that this confrontation was the tipping point. The apartment, once a familiar place filled with laughter and shared memories, now felt like a battlefield, and I realized with a sinking heart that nothing would ever be the same again. Something had to change, and I was about to discover just how far I was willing to go. Before that moment, life with Emily had seemed ordinary, even comforting, in its own quiet way. Mornings were our little ritual. I'd make coffee just the way she liked it, sugar on one side, cream on the other, and we'd sit by the window talking about trivial things, her plans for the day, my small victories at work, the way the sunlight hit the living room floor. Those moments felt warm, grounding, as if nothing in the world could touch the bond we shared. I believed I had built a life of love and trust, where our connection was unshakable. Emily was ambitious, bright, and, admittedly, a little headstrong. She had a way of charming people, a way of bending situations to her favor without seeming cruel. I admired her drive and often found myself quietly proud, brushing aside the occasional sharp word or impatient sigh. I told myself every parent deals with that, every loving mother forgives those small frustrations. I'd done it countless times, smoothing over arguments, letting her take the lead in decisions, celebrating her victories like they were my own. Even in the subtle chaos of bills and responsibilities, there was rhythm. I'd wake early to check emails, make sure the rent was paid, or drop off groceries at her door, and she would smile, thank me, sometimes hug me with genuine warmth. It was in these moments that I felt seen, that I felt my efforts mattered. I'd sit in my quiet apartment later at night, sipping tea, thinking of her laughter and her future, believing that my sacrifices were shaping a life of love and opportunity for her. Yet beneath the routine, there were tiny hints, almost invisible, that things weren't entirely as they seemed. Sometimes she would roll her eyes when I reminded her of deadlines. Occasionally she'd comment on my old-fashioned ways with a half-smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. I brushed them off, thinking I was overreacting, that these were just normal mother-daughter tiffs. But there was a subtle tension growing, something I couldn't yet name. I remember one evening, sitting together on the couch, watching a movie and laughing at a silly scene. She rested her head on my shoulder, and I felt that warmth of connection, the comfort of shared life. But even then, a flicker of doubt crossed my mind, a whisper that maybe not all was as harmonious as I believed. Still, I ignored it, trusting in years of love, thinking that such doubts were fleeting shadows in a home built on care. Looking back now, I can see the calm before the storm, the gentle rhythm that masked the undercurrents of selfishness and entitlement that were quietly shaping her into someone I was only beginning to truly understand. At the time, I had no idea that this ordinary life, filled with laughter and small acts of care, was about to shatter completely, leaving me facing a version of Emily I had never imagined. It was the life I thought I knew, the life I treasured, and yet, it was only the beginning of a story I would soon realize I could never return to. The first signs were so small, so easy to dismiss, that I almost convinced myself I was imagining them. It started with a shrug here, a dismissive comment there, tiny cracks in the warmth I had always relied on. Emily would interrupt me mid-sentence, brushing off my advice as if my experience and care were meaningless. "Mom, I've got this," she'd say, her tone polite but sharp, leaving me with a strange hollow ache in my chest. It wasn't just the words, it was the subtle way she looked past me, like I didn't exist, like my voice had no weight in her world. I remember a Saturday morning when I came over with homemade pastries, hoping for a simple breakfast together. She barely glanced up from her phone, scrolling through messages while I set the table. "These look nice, Mom," she muttered, distracted, not even looking at me. A laugh bubbled out of me, trying to cover the sting of disappointment, but deep down, I felt an unsettling shift. It was as if the daughter I had raised with care and attention was slipping through my fingers, replaced by someone polite on the surface but distant, dismissive, and quietly entitled. The subtle betrayals continued in small, insidious ways. Emily would borrow money and forget to mention it later, or take credit for decisions I had helped her make. Friends would tell me she boasted about handling things on her own, conveniently leaving me out of the story. I'd smile, nod, and pretend not to notice, whispering to myself that perhaps these were harmless exaggerations, that maybe I was reading too much into it. But the unease grew stronger with every passing day. There were also moments that cut deeper, moments meant to test boundaries. She'd make jokes at my expense, sly comments about how outdated my ideas were, and I'd laugh along, swallowing the bitter taste of humiliation. The warmth and laughter we once shared felt increasingly fragile, punctuated by these small but sharp reminders that respect was fading, replaced by entitlement. Each of these moments was like a tiny crack forming in the foundation of everything I believed we had built together. My internal monologue became a quiet battlefield. I questioned myself constantly. Am I overreacting? Was I imagining these slights? Or is she really changing, becoming someone I barely recognize? These doubts gnawed at me, leaving me both anxious and watchful, noticing patterns I had previously ignored. The loving, cooperative daughter I thought I knew was slowly revealing a different side, self-centered, careless with words, and unaware of the pain she was causing. By the time the rent notices and careless dismissals started piling up, I realized the subtle betrayals were no longer isolated incidents. They were signs of a larger truth. Emily's disregard was intentional, her respect conditional, and my role in her life becoming less and less valued. And yet, despite this growing tension, I held on to hope, clinging to memories of our bond, telling myself that things would balance out. But deep down, I sensed that something was building, a storm gathering quietly, and that ordinary days of love and laughter were about to be replaced by a reckoning I could no longer ignore. It didn't take long for me to see the cracks widening into something far more deliberate. Emily's behavior had grown sharper, calculated in ways I hadn't noticed before. What had once seemed like small slights now carried an unmistakable edge, a hidden motive I couldn't ignore. She wasn't merely distracted or busy, she was intentionally pushing boundaries, testing how far she could go before I reacted. There were mornings when I stopped by to check on her, and she would wave me off with a casual, "I've got it, Mom. Don't worry about anything." At first, I accepted it as independence, but then I realized it wasn't about her self-sufficiency. It was about control, her control over me, over my willingness to continue giving, over my patience and kindness. The subtle power play gnawed at my heart, leaving me both frustrated and fearful. I began to notice other signs, moments that had previously slipped under my radar. Bills mysteriously unpaid, small financial missteps that forced me to step in at the last minute, excuses about missing deadlines, all while she presented herself as competent, capable, even responsible. Friends would tell me how confident and independent she seemed, praising her ability to handle everything alone, never realizing that I was the silent force behind it all. That praise, once a source of pride, now felt like mockery. And it wasn't just the money or the logistics. Emily had started subtly manipulating conversations, twisting words, and framing events to cast herself as the victim if I confronted her. There were nights when I would lie awake, replaying interactions over and over, wondering if I had misunderstood, doubting my own memory. Was I imagining the coldness, the dismissive tones, the little lies that seemed so carefully placed? Or was this who she really was beneath the surface, the charming, ambitious daughter I had nurtured now showing her teeth? I caught glimpses of it in the way she interacted with her friends, laughing about minor inconveniences she had caused me, casually dropping details of her independence while ignoring my sacrifices. It was as if she had created a parallel life in which I did not exist, one where my support was invisible and my love unappreciated. Each revelation left me reeling, forcing me to question everything I had taken for granted, the trust, the closeness, the family bond one had believed unbreakable. By now, the tension had become almost unbearable. I began keeping quiet, observing, cataloguing every slight, every manipulation, every calculated omission. I realized that Emily's behavior wasn't accidental or careless, it was intentional. She had motives I didn't yet fully understand, desires that placed her own interests above my well-being, and a willingness to dismiss me completely in her pursuit of freedom and control. My heart ached not just for the betrayal itself, but for the realization that the person I had loved and trusted most was capable of such deliberate disregard. And yet, even in the midst of confusion and hurt, a seed of clarity began to grow. If I wanted to survive this, if I wanted to reclaim my dignity and my voice, I would need to understand her, anticipate her, and prepare for the moment when I could finally confront the truth. The realization struck me like a lightning bolt. The game had changed, and I could no longer remain a passive participant. What came next would require careful thought, unwavering resolve, and the courage to face the daughter I had once adored and the one who had begun to betray me. The quiet moments were the hardest. When the apartment emptied and the house was still, that's when the weight of everything hit me hardest. I would sit alone, staring at the walls that once held laughter and warmth, replaying conversations in my head that left a bitter taste. Each memory of a dismissive glance, a careless word, a forgotten favor, stacked upon the last until I felt crushed under their weight. I was surrounded by people who loved me, friends who cared, yet in those moments, I felt utterly invisible. I tried to keep going, tried to smile through interactions, to hold on to a sense of normalcy, but inside I was unraveling. There were nights I would cry quietly, not wanting to be seen, not wanting anyone to know that the daughter I had raised, the person I had devoted my life to, had begun to treat me as if I were replaceable. Every act of kindness I had extended, every sacrifice I had made, now felt like it had been taken for granted, stripped of its meaning. I remember sitting on the edge of my bed, the dim lamp casting shadows across the room, thinking about all the bills I had covered, the nights I had gone without sleep worrying about her safety, the countless times I had supported her emotionally and financially. And yet, here she was, brushing off my concerns, treating my presence as an annoyance rather than a gift. I felt a cold anger rise, but it was mingled with sorrow, a sorrow that my love and dedication had been met with indifference. The loneliness was deafening. Even when friends tried to reach out, I found it difficult to speak about Emily without feeling a knot of guilt and shame tighten in my chest. How could I admit that my own daughter was betraying me? That the person I had nurtured and protected was now dismissing and disrespecting me? I felt trapped, caught between love and hurt, pride and humiliation, unsure how to reconcile the mother I had been with the powerless, aching figure I had become in these quiet hours. And yet, amid the pain, a spark of clarity flickered. I realized that staying silent, continuing to bear the disrespect, would only let the cycle continue. My mind began to turn over strategies, tiny thoughts of how I might reclaim some control, some dignity. But for now, I allowed myself to feel the weight of betrayal fully, to acknowledge the pain that had been accumulating for years. The heartbreak was raw, the loneliness absolute, yet in that quiet suffering, the first seeds of resolve began to take root. The tension was rising, and though no one could see it on the surface, I knew that the calm before the storm was ending. Something had shifted within me, I could no longer remain passive, and the next moments of confrontation were approaching. The story I thought I knew, the life of quiet love and devotion, was about to collide with the reality of betrayal, and I felt a mixture of fear and anticipation for what I would finally have to face. By now, Emily's betrayals were no longer subtle, they had become overt, cruel, and impossible to ignore. It started with small public humiliations, a laugh shared with her friends at my expense, a dismissive comment about my old-fashioned ways in front of neighbors, and the casual way she ignored my presence as if I were a shadow in her life. Each act cut deeper than the last, leaving me stunned, angry, and yet strangely calculated in my observation. I realized that this was no accident. She had learned to push me to my limits, testing my patience and my pride at every turn. There were mornings when I would visit, expecting at least the faintest acknowledgement of my help, and she would barely glance up. "Mom, not now," she'd say, her voice clipped, her eyes focused elsewhere. And when I reminded her of a small favor or a past sacrifice, she would shrug, brush it off, or even turn it into a joke in front of others. I felt my dignity slipping through my fingers, as though the life I had built for both of us, the care, the sacrifices, the endless support, was being dismissed, mocked, and erased in real time. The financial strain had become more pronounced too. Emily had begun mismanaging bills with a casual recklessness that left me scrambling to fix things before consequences piled up. She would argue when I offered guidance, framing herself as the independent adult, while simultaneously relying on me to bail her out. Friends and neighbors commented on how confident and self-reliant she seemed, never seeing the web of support I was providing behind the scenes. I realized with a sinking heart that the recognition I once felt proud to receive had vanished completely. My internal monologue became a war zone. How could someone I raised, someone I nurtured, treat me like this? Was it entitlement? Was it cruelty? Or had I simply failed to teach her respect? Each question collided with the undeniable truth: Emily had crossed the line. She was no longer the daughter I knew, she was a master of subtle manipulation, emboldened by my silence, and increasingly careless with the emotional pain she caused me. The breaking point was creeping closer with every interaction. One evening, she invited friends over without warning, and while we sat at the dinner table, she boasted about ignoring my advice, about managing on her own, all the while making me feel like an invisible outsider in the life I had helped create. The humiliation stung like acid, a sharp, burning reminder that the small betrayals had escalated into something larger, more deliberate, and deeply personal. As I left her apartment that night, my mind was a storm of anger, disbelief, and sorrow. I knew that whatever came next could not be ignored. The lines had been drawn clearly. She was the antagonist, and I could no longer remain passive. Something had to shift, some form of justice had to be met, and the next confrontation, when it came, would be decisive. The calm of our past life had shattered, replaced by a growing tension that demanded resolution, and I could feel, with every beat of my heart, that the moment of reckoning was approaching. The moment I had feared and, in a strange way, anticipated finally arrived. I stood in Emily's apartment again, the familiar walls now feeling alien, suffocating, as if the air itself was charged with tension. In my hand, I gripped the overdue rent notice, the crumpled paper almost a symbol of everything that had been ignored, dismissed, and taken for granted. Emily looked up at me, her eyes sharp, impatient, and filled with that same cold confidence that had begun to gnaw at me months ago. "Mom, seriously, act your age," she snapped, and it hit me like a punch to the chest. I froze for a heartbeat, the words echoing in my mind, reminding me of every sacrifice I had made, every sleepless night, every moment I had put her needs before my own. My hands trembled, tightening around the notice as memories flashed across my mind like a relentless slideshow. There were the nights I had stayed up, worrying over her bills, silently covering what she couldn't manage. There were the days I had hidden my own exhaustion to make sure she never felt unsupported. And yet, here she was, treating me as if I were some inconvenient relic of the past. Her voice, sharp and accusatory, cut through my reverie. "I don't need you to run my life, Mom. I can handle it myself." The words stung, but they also clarified something I had been quietly realizing for weeks. She had never seen me as a partner in her life. She had seen me as a tool, a source of support to be taken for granted until she no longer needed me, or until she could discard me altogether. The betrayal, once subtle, was now stark and undeniable. I drew in a shaky breath, forcing myself to speak, my voice tight but steady. "Emily, do you even know how much I've done for you? How many times I've covered your mistakes, worried about your future, supported you when no one else did?" Her expression faltered for a fraction of a second, but the defiance quickly returned. "Mom, I said I've got this. Stop acting like I don't know what I'm doing." It was the final confirmation I needed. She had no intention of acknowledging me, of recognizing my efforts or my sacrifices. And in that moment, a profound clarity settled over me. I realized that this confrontation, this moment of pain and disbelief, was the pivot point. Everything I had endured, the dismissals, the subtle manipulations, the hidden resentments, had led to this scene. And now, I understood with absolute certainty that I could not remain passive any longer. I pressed the crumpled notice to my chest, my mind racing, my heart pounding. The anger, the hurt, the years of quiet endurance coalesced into a singular resolve. This was the moment I knew I had to do something. Something deliberate, something that would reclaim my dignity and demand accountability. The room seemed to shrink around us, tension so thick it could be cut with a knife, as I stepped back, forcing myself to breathe and plan. I left her apartment that day with a strange mixture of sorrow and determination. I knew what I had to do, and I also knew that the next steps would require patience, cunning, and courage. Emily had drawn her line, and I had drawn mine. The story was about to change, and the quiet, invisible mother I had been for so long was preparing to take her place firmly in the center of her own life and in the reckoning that Emily had unknowingly set in motion. Once the shock had settled and the sting of betrayal had burned through me, I began to plan. Revenge wasn't about cruelty, it was about justice, about reclaiming the respect and dignity that had been stripped away over the years. I started quietly, observing Emily's patterns, noting the moments when her confidence overshadowed responsibility, and the ways she leaned on others without acknowledging the foundation I had built beneath her feet. Every slight, every careless comment, became a tool in my careful calculation. I approached it with a steady, deliberate patience. I began leaving subtle reminders of her dependence, small yet undeniable truths she could no longer ignore. I would ask pointed questions about bills she had mishandled, about obligations she had dismissed, and watch as her calm exterior flickered under the pressure she had never expected. Each interaction was precise, exposing the reality she had tried to bury, the fact that much of the life she proudly claimed as her own had been sustained by my labor and care. There were moments of quiet satisfaction when she faltered, the slightest hesitation or flustered glance revealing her awareness that the game had shifted. I didn't shout, didn't rage, I simply allowed consequences to unfold naturally, watching as her confidence cracked under the weight of accountability. Her friends began to notice too, subtle changes in her demeanor, the tension she could no longer conceal. The carefully constructed image of independence and control she had presented so boldly was beginning to unravel. Internal monologue carried me through the process. This isn't cruel. This is the balance I've earned. I'm not the villain, I'm the one finally seen. Every moment of dismissiveness, every unacknowledged sacrifice, has brought us here. It's time for reality to meet her entitlement. With every small victory, I felt a sense of power returning, not the power to punish, but the power to assert my value, to command the respect I had long been denied. The culmination of these subtle strategies was a confrontation unlike any before. I addressed the unpaid bills, the casual disregard, and the mockery she had inflicted, laying it out plainly, calmly, and without hesitation. Emily could no longer ignore the truth, no longer act as if she had built her life entirely on her own. The humiliation was quiet but undeniable, the lesson clear: actions have consequences, and the disregard of love and respect can only continue for so long. By the end of this phase, I felt a weight lift from my chest. Justice had been served in its most satisfying form, without malice, without theatrics, but with precision and clarity. Emily had learned that entitlement and arrogance could not erase years of devotion. And as I stepped back, watching her finally grapple with the reality she had ignored for so long, I understood that this was more than revenge, it was reclamation. I had reclaimed my voice, my dignity, and my rightful place as someone who could no longer be dismissed or taken for granted. The battle was far from cruel, yet the lesson was unforgettable, and I knew that what came next, the resolution, the consequences, and the peace I had long sought, would bring this chapter to its definitive close. The days that followed were quieter, but heavy with change. Emily began to feel the weight of the actions she had taken for granted. The careless independence she had flaunted was no longer a shield, it had become a mirror reflecting her reliance on me all along. Bills she had ignored, favors she had assumed would be silently fulfilled, the respect she had dismissed, every one of them now demanded acknowledgement. The consequences weren't cruel, but they were undeniable, and for the first time, Emily could not shrug them off or laugh them away. I observed her reactions carefully. At first, there was shock, then irritation, followed by a dawning understanding that the life she believed she had built alone was intertwined with my patience, my work, my sacrifices. Friends and neighbors noticed too. They saw the subtle shift in her demeanor, the hesitations and stumbles that were never there before. She tried to maintain her confidence, but I could see through it. The realization was settling in, and there was no escaping it. When we finally spoke, the conversation was tense but necessary. "Emily," I said, my voice steady, "I've supported you for years. I've covered your mistakes, encouraged you, loved you. You can't ignore that." She looked at me, eyes wide, mouth slightly open, searching for a defense that didn't exist. She understood, finally, that respect and gratitude were not optional. I could feel my own tension start to release. The humiliation, the disrespect, the endless emotional labor I had borne alone, it had all led to this moment of reckoning. She was confronted not by anger or malice, but by the undeniable truth of her actions and their consequences. And as I watched her absorb it, I felt the first real sense of closure in months. The peace that followed was quiet but profound. Emily, humbled and reflective, began to change slowly, carefully, in ways that suggested she would not forget the lessons learned. I reclaimed my dignity, my voice, and my space, setting boundaries that had long been ignored. There was no need for dramatics or vengeance beyond what was earned. The natural consequences had been sufficient. As I stood back and observed, a calm sense of justice settled over me. The betrayal had been addressed, the disrespect corrected, and my own heart, weary but steadfast, could finally rest. Life, once fractured by entitlement and disregard, began to find a new rhythm. Emily would remember this chapter, and I would remember that reclaiming respect doesn't require cruelty, it requires clarity, resolve, and the courage to stand firm. And though the road to rebuilding our relationship would be careful and measured, I finally felt that the scales had been balanced, and that I had earned the peace I had long deserved. Looking back, I realize now that every moment of pain, every slight, every dismissal, was a lesson in strength and self-worth. I hope my story reminds anyone watching that love alone is not enough if it comes at the cost of your dignity. Boundaries are not optional, they are essential. Respect cannot be assumed, it must be demanded and defended. I learned that being kind and giving does not mean you must endure endless disrespect. Sacrifice is meaningful only when it is acknowledged, and standing silent in the face of betrayal only prolongs your suffering. Never underestimate the power of your voice, your presence, and your resolve. Even when those closest to you seem blind to your efforts, your worth is never diminished. I also learned that revenge is not about cruelty. Justice, when delivered with clarity and intention, can be both powerful and morally sound. Holding someone accountable does not make you harsh, it makes you aware, it makes you strong. And in that awareness, you reclaim the life and dignity that might have been taken from you. So, if you are watching this and feel invisible, overlooked, or betrayed, remember this. Standing up for yourself is not selfish, it is necessary. Protect your boundaries, demand your respect, and never let anyone diminish your value. The hardest love is sometimes the love you give yourself, and it is the love that will ultimately guide you through the darkest betrayals. Sometimes, the lessons we learn the hard way shape us into the people we are meant to be. And though the journey may be painful, the peace and self-respect that follow are worth every tear, every doubt, and every moment of silent struggle. This is my story, my journey, and my truth, and I hope it inspires you to never allow anyone to undermine your worth.